Ayanokoji Kiyotaka and Johan Liebert, two well-known intelligent characters in the mainstream of online media, having to go face-to-face in the battle of wits. Which of them would come out on top? Now, when measuring intelligence and outsmarting in the general sense, it'd be important to understand both characters' strengths, weaknesses, and personal approaches in multiple different scenarios and rate them in several aspects. First off, we can go ahead with the most obvious point, intelligence. To evaluate the overall intelligence of both Ayanokoji and Johan, we should look at three different aspects of outsmarting that are important for the battle of wits: fluid intelligence, crystallized intelligence, and emotional intelligence. First off, we have fluid intelligence. Now, what is fluid intelligence? Generally, fluid intelligence is defined basically as your mental agility, the ability to think on your feet and solve new problems you haven't encountered before. It's about using logic and reasoning to break down new information and come out with creative solutions. It essentially includes skills like pattern recognition, abstract thinking, and adaptability. So with this in mind, let's compare Johan and Ayanokoji in terms of their fluid intelligence. An example of Ayanokoji's fluid intelligence comes from before he even enrolled into Advanced Nutrition High School. As he was escaping from his father's home while the White Room was out of commission, Ayanokoji had very little time to escape with the help of Matsuo, though we're unsure of details like how long his actual trip took and if he took multiple buses or not. We do know he escaped at morning because he couldn't escape at night, otherwise his father would be searching for him far before he could even reach the school. This would mean that at most, he had a few hours between escaping the house and reaching the school. In this short duration, Ayanokoji managed to grasp a basic level of understanding of how people his age act. And while this doesn't exactly show off in the anime, Ayanokoji adapted in that short time frame and became what could generally be considered a normal high schooler. He was able to laugh, sweat, crack jokes, and act in a childish manner, something that would be pointed out by Suzune multiple times. Even his way of thinking would be extremely different at this point in the novel compared to after Year 1 Volume 3, where he dropped this persona act. Ayanokoji with this showcased high levels of pattern recognition, being able to understand common traits in teenagers via multiple observations, and shift adaptability, being able to apply his newfound knowledge to change his behavior and fit in more in the new environment. So how does Johan compare? Johan as a child was forced to live in an inhumane institution disguised as an orphanage known as Kinderheim 511. The goal of this orphanage was to create and raise the perfect soldiers. But Johan had a grudge against the creator of this institution, Franz Bonaparte. So as he got a chance, Johan was able to trick the janitors and escape his imprisonment. And once he was back amongst the rest of the children, he thought of an idea that could let him both escape the orphanage and destroy it as a form of revenge against Franz due to his grudge against him. So Johan manipulated both the adults and the children in the orphanage. He threw around rumors, lied to children about their names, all in due to cause havoc. In his own words, he was adding fuel to an already existing flame. With just these few moves, Johan was able to bring the whole orphanage tumbling down. Children and adults fought and killed each other as he watched. With the manipulation and tactical perspective of this aside, as we'll talk about those later, Johan here displayed great fluid intelligence, having great understanding of the mentality of the people in the orphanage, and applying this information uses a few moves to achieve his goals without putting himself in the line of fire. With these feats side by side, it's easy to say while Johan's resourcefulness and reasoning were great, they get edged out by Ayanokoji's own adaptability and pattern recognition, as Ayanokoji was working with a lot less information with a high requirement for adaptability, seeing he had nothing to go off other than his own reasoning and observations, making his situation more novel, even if Johan's feat is nothing shy from great. Next, we have crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence refers to the knowledge and skills you accumulate through your life. It's like a mental library of all the things you've learned and experienced. Crystallized intelligence is usually measured via statements, as characters rarely go through a step-by-step process of explaining their knowledge in all types of subjects. But it can still be inferred via their feats and statements, as knowledge application is proof of good crystallized intelligence in the area being applied. For Johan, we know he learned a lot of psychology evident by his feats and Hartman's statements. We also know that Kinderheim mainly focused on doing experiments on the children, hence physical and educational purposes weren't pushed much. But the children were forced to forge extreme psychological pressure. Johan himself went through adulthood learning more himself from the sake of his goals. We know he learned law and management to master 2 languages. In addition, to have learning marksman skills, meaning his crystallized intelligence is clearly on the high end. Ayanokoji, however, has multiple statements and on-screen implications for his knowledge. While his statement of having more knowledge than a human can gain in a lifetime could be argued to be a hyperbole, Volume 0 clearly shows Ayanokoji doing multiple activities, including VR for observation and IRL training, a written test consisting of 5 writing systems: hiragana, katakana, the Latin alphabet, numbers, and simple kanji, calligraphy, martial arts including judo, boxing, karate, learning Japanese, mathematics, economics, political science, meeting curriculum, learning music and tea ceremony, and other traditional cultural pursuits, a memory curriculum test, and swimming lessons. It's not a stretch to say that Ayanokoji has more crystallized intelligence. Even if one were to measure crystallized intelligence by the application of it, Ayanokoji would still take it over Johan, as he had to have applied the knowledge and skills he gained in the White Room in exams to actually survive. Meaning, Ayanokoji takes crystallized intelligence comfortably. Next, we move on to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is all about understanding and managing emotions, both your own and those of others. It's a set of skills that helps you navigate the complexities of social interactions and relationships. While emotional intelligence has both intrapersonal and interpersonal sides, the focus of measuring it in people usually stems from the interpersonal side, as someone with good emotional intelligence will always be capable in the intrapersonal side no matter what. Hence, interpersonal takes more importance when dictating who has higher emotional intelligence. So with that in mind, let's compare Ayanokoji and Johan in the 4 corners of emotional intelligence. First, emotional perception is the ability to recognize people's emotions through facial expressions, body language, pictures, voices, and so on. This is a baseline ability in emotional intelligence as is required for any of the other processes in the model. Johan is rather weak in this category by feat, since a lot of his process stems from emotional understanding via information gathering. So while he should have great emotional perception, logically, it's difficult to quantify how good it is due to the lack of any on-screen demonstrations of how good it is. Meanwhile, Ayanokoji, being the narrator of his own story, holds a lot of feats for emotional perception, including but not limited to directly identifying the emotions of characters like Suzune, Hirata, Arisu, Ryuen, Nagumo, and Kushida at multiple instances of the novel, being able to discern their thoughts and feelings via his emotional perception. And this is especially impressive seeing Kushida and Nagumo are among the top actors in the verse, with them being able to completely master intentions and thoughts when needed. Emotional perception goes to Ayanokoji, though with conjecture of Johan's emotional understanding, one could argue Johan takes it or is at least on par with Ayanokoji in emotional perception, but this reasoning would be mainly speculative. Second, we have emotional facilitation, also known as emotional engagement, and is the second activity proposed by the ability model. Relates to a person's ability to use emotions, whether it's in their own emotions or another person's emotions, in order to achieve a desired outcome. Seeing we'll be focusing on emotional facilitation in others. It's important to simplify this definition, as it doesn't simply refer to any form of emotional manipulation, but also the ability to understand how to deal with emotions in other people, when to engage with said people and when not to achieve the desired outcome. To elaborate, Johan and Ayanokoji both have great feats here. We have Johan being able to facilitate Lunge's pride against him in conjecture with his deception, to keep Lunge trailing Tenma instead of the true criminal behind the killings, who is Johan himself, or utilizing his understandings of Jurgens and his trauma to make him kill Mrs. Kemp in order to throw off the investigation regarding him even further. Johan's emotional facilitation is often indirect like this, but extremely effective in persuading and controlling people at their weakest points. Likewise, Ayanokoji has similar feats, though his means are often more direct. We see him in Year 1 Volume 10 confront Hirata after Yamochi's explosion and help him out of his bad mental state. And we notice Ayanokoji did not just confront Hirata right after the explosion, but rather a while after the reality has settled in for him. And he doesn't go in and try to force Hirata to see the whole picture like the anime portrayed, but rather he let Hirata speak his mind and gave him comfort as a friend. We also see something similar with Ichinose in the previous volume, where Ayanokoji confronts her about insecurity regarding her past, thus allowing her to get out unscratched from Arisa's mental attack. Both Johan and Ayanokoji manage to confront people's emotions and facilitate them using different methodologies and understanding. It's tough to say who's superior in this category, as both of their demonstrations are great examples of emotional facilitation. It's safe to say they're arguably equal here. However, if one were to say Johan or Ayanokoji edge out the other due to the difference in methodology, that'd also be a fair take. Third off, we have emotional understanding, which is an ability that is built upon an understanding of the complexities of emotions. While many people have the ability to recognize basic facial expressions, few of them are able to predictably recognize and understand emotional language and to appreciate the nuances of complex emotional relationships. Ayanokoji's reputation when it comes to emotional understanding is rather misunderstood, as the anime portrayed him to be an edgelord without much ability to empathize with people. However, he's different in the novels, with arguably one of his best displays in emotional intelligence stemming from his Year 2 Volume 7 strategy, where he managed to predict every single one of Take's actions by having psychologically profiled and analyzed his personality through his subtle actions and understanding of the White Room's environment for generations below his own. This is an incredible feat for emotional understanding, seeing how little information Ayanokoji had to go off and how he only had one direct confrontation with Takeya before this. Via just a little bit of information, he was able to understand the complications of Takeya's inferiority complex and his hatreds towards Ayanokoji by inferring how his existence affected the next generations. Johan, on the other hand, utilizes a different methodology, as he likes to investigate his strategies thoroughly to find their weaknesses and gather information about their past, to infer possible trauma and pints of interest that he could utilize to manipulate them. Two good examples are the aforementioned Jurgens and the private investigator Richard Braun. With Jurgens, Johan was able to gather complete information about his past and was able to infer many details about his trauma with his mother, the basement he used to get beaten in, and the doll that would stare at him whenever that happened, which allowed him to manipulate Jurgens to his advantage. In addition to him, we also have Richard Braun, whom Johan was able to completely analyze and understand by investigating his past murder of a young boy. Johan had deduced that Braun killed the boy voluntarily and had been using his drinking habit as a way to cope with the idea that he murdered an innocent person completely sober without any excuse. We can see from this that both Johan and Ayanokoji are beasts in their own right when it comes to emotional understanding, though due to better application of psychological premises, Johan would edge in it even if the argument could be made that the information he had helped him a lot, as he showcased that he could utilize that information way better than any normal person could and understood the deep layers of the psyche of his victims. Lastly, we have emotional management, which relates more specifically to someone's ability or lack thereof to regulate emotions in both themselves and others. As the highest level of ability in the ability model, someone with high emotional intelligence would be expected to be able to manipulate the moods of themselves and others, essentially harnessing the mood and managing it to achieve their goals. So again, focusing more on the interpersonal aspect. Let's look at Ayanokoji and Johan's feats in emotional management. Johan doesn't excel the most in emotional management by his feats due to the nature of his goals. He does have one decent feat with Detective Jun Suk, where Johan managed to seduce the detective by cosplaying as a woman and was able to slowly gain his trust and subtly misdirect him regarding the case he was investigating, which allowed Johan to cut another possibility tie to his identity. For Ayanokoji, his feat with Ichinose could suffice also for emotional management, and he has another feat with Nanase in Year 2 Volume 3. He was able to tame her anger and turn her into an ally after making her realize her original misunderstanding about him. With this, emotional management could go to Ayanokoji alongside emotional intelligence as a whole, though switching up a few categories and giving it to Johan is acceptable as well, as it's generally very close. Moving on from overall intelligence, we can tackle more tactical aspects in Outsmarting and Battle of Wits. First off, we'll start with manipulation, which is usually an important aspect in Outsmarting if utilized correctly in conjecture with good strategy and planning. Johan's most remarkable feat here is arguably his manipulation of Richard Braun, as Johan was able to perfectly understand his insecurity and force him into commit suicide in order to eliminate another threat to his true identity. And the way he did it is quite peculiar as well. Johan strategically lured Richard to a bar at that time to make sure as though this was the last scene in which he was at. This will give the impression to any witness that he was outside drinking and getting drunk. He then purposely isolated Richard and was quite selective in the places which he brought him towards, so that it was only 2 of them. This was done during the night, so that as Johan lures him into the rooftop, there were no passersby or anyone confirming Johan being with Braun. Johan then chose to bring Richard up onto the rooftop, and this was done to disguise it up perfectly as a suicide case, by presenting a bottle of whiskey to Richard as he drinks it, leading him up to jump off the rooftop. This will leave the impression to most people that this was a suicide case driven by alcoholic addiction, since most of the people who knew that Richard was recovering from an alcoholic addiction. This will leave the impression of relapse towards them. Therefore, there would not be much need to investigate any leads nor associations with this case. Now, while Ayanokoji is known a lot for manipulating things from the shadows, he's also capable of similar feats to Johan, as in Year 1 Volume 7, Ayanokoji threatens Kamuro by implying that he will report Kamuro's surveillance efforts to Sakayanagi and expose her inability to effectively carry out her orders. By leveraging the threat of exposing Kamuro's perceived weakness, Ayanokoji aims to destabilize Kamuro's confidence and loyalty to Sakayanagi. Ayanokoji doesn't know if Kamuro spies him on behalf of Sakayanagi, but insists on it to find out if there really is a connection. Ayanokoji highlights the apparent contradiction in Kamuro's behavior, spending her time on a mundane task like tailing Ayanokoji, while vehemently denying any loyalty to Sakayanagi. By framing the act of tailing as a mundane and uninteresting task, Ayanokoji subtly undermines Kamuro's denial, implying that such an action will not be undertaken without any deeper motive. Second, Ayanokoji challenges Kamuro's assertion by asking a rhetorical question. Then why do you follow her orders? This question serves to highlight the inconsistency in Kamuro's behavior and prompts her to reflect on underlying motivations. Ayanokoji implies that Kamuro's actions speak louder than her words, suggesting that there must be a reason why Kamuro continues to follow Sakayanagi's orders, despite claiming to have no loyalty to her. Kamuro falters due to Ayanokoji's probing, and he's able to deduce more information due to his manipulation of Kamuro, displaying his ability to manipulate people on the spot. From the aforementioned feats, while Ayanokoji does possess a great ability to think quickly and manipulate people by understanding their possible weaknesses, Johan demonstrates a much deeper level of manipulation in his victims, being able to control them on a far more potent level even if their guard is up. From this, Johan takes manipulation. After that, we have strategy and planning. And while some people might bring up deception too, usually and specifically in the case of Ayanokoji and Johan, their strategy and planning feats will always have some sort of deception in order to throw off their adversaries from catching up to them. So they will be evaluated with that in mind. Starting off with planning. Johan's early planning to erase any evidence regarding his identity. The fall of Berlin has caused a siege of flood in eastern Germany. 4 wealthy middle-aged couples who were childless, whom could have adopted Johan during that time, in which he had to eliminate them as no one must know his existence, were according to Lunge killed in the exact same manner. The modus operandi being performed with a knife slit to the throat. This was done to muffle any sounds that could arouse suspicions among the neighborhood when the crime is being committed, unlike a gun for instance. To reinforce this subtle crime being committed, Johan hired Adolf Junkers to break into the high security locking of the houses, to not create any unnecessary sound. The crimes were committed in a group, Fritz, Boris, and Junkers, to maximize the efficiency of crime without resistance from the couples. Also, with the flood, it erases away huge forensic evidence present in the crime scene, alongside these recurring murders that took around 2 years so that the police would not find any immediate pattern to them and assume it to be a robbery. Since Lunge and local police must have catch on to Adolf Junkers and his man, Johan's next step was to eliminate them to cut off any leads or connections back to him. And Junkers being a major eyewitness to the case via Lunge's statement in which this step was necessary to make. And this was confirmed by chapter 8. Adolf Junkers being chased by Johan crashed into a car by accident. He was then immediately performed in surgery by Tenma and afterward led to questioning by Lunge. As Lunge tries to probe Junkers into an answer, Junkers could not answer anything and ends up screaming in terror, which shows Johan's control over his victims via psychological trauma. As Junkers was about to leave the hospital and visit Tenma, he was shocked by a police officer who was poisoned by the exact same candy that was used by Johan. This terrified Junkers that he began fleeing the hospital, in which Tenma saw the exact same incident chase after him in the process. Johan anticipated that Junkers would go to an abandoned building as it was easier to hide and no one could go there, in which Tenma followed Junkers all the way there. Upon the confrontation of Johan, Junkers confessed everything to Tenma of what truly happened, that they were hired by Johan to complete the job. Tenma attempted to persuade Johan to not shoot, in which Johan subtly guilt-tripped Tenma by stating that Johan eliminating the director was simply a wish of Tenma. In utter shock of Tenma realizing this, he could not do anything other than to be still. Johan also utilizing the heavy downpour to muffle the gun sound being produced by him as he was shooting Junkers, thus washing away any forensic evidence in the crime scene as he leaves it. Through the elimination of Junkers and his men, this cuts off any lead tracing back to Johan via eyewitness testimony that can be used to convict him, closing the case entirely and allowing him to start threading onward to erase other threads as he nears his goal. Johan showcases incredible long-term planning and short-term control over his tactics, hiding information and manipulating it to stay hidden and appear only when it's beneficial for him. So what does Ayanokoji have to compare to this? Well, Ayanokoji's most feat for planning would be his class transfer strategy. And while yes, it has strategy in the name, it's currently in its planning phase. In order to understand what this massive wave of actions Ayanokoji took towards his specific goal to change classes eventually, the premise of the class transfer strategy and the reason he developed it have to be understood. Kei was the first person he met who he thought was similar to him. They carried a similar darkness inside them. So she was a person he could create an actual connection with. Unfortunately, he only learned this after the event of Year 1 Volume 4, where he instigated the bullying scenario for her and destroyed her perception of him. At this moment though, he didn't care about that because his actions throughout Year 1 Volume 3 to the first half of Year 1 Volume 7 are all actions of his White Room persona, reacting to Chabashida's blackmail. Kei's feelings and his relationship with her was the last thing he was thinking about. However, during this time, her image of him was slightly improving. The pool incident in Volume 4.5, where she thought he was the only decent guy for stopping the other boys' plan. She turned to him in Volume 5 when they were losing in a sports festival and suspected that he was helping behind the scenes there. By the time in Year 1 Volume 7, when he met with his father, she still didn't like him, but her perception of him had certainly improved. So why would Ayanokoji be making an effort to improve their relationship at this time? He didn't yet have any intention to date her, and he wasn't interested in learning about love from her yet either. The class transfer strategy was born around this time, and this was him creating a relationship with Kei to leverage with Ichinose to transfer to her class. He wanted to transfer classes originally to get away from Sae, so she can't keep blackmailing him. We learned in Year 2 Volume 7.5 that he had asked how many points it would cost to remove a teacher. Since that wasn't any option, leaving her class would be the next best option. Once Ayanokoji spoke to his father and realized Chabashida was lying, his whole persona shifted again. This is where he returns to his real persona. Since he no longer has to appease Chabashida, he no longer needed to change classes to escape her. But his relationship with Kei was also changing now. Their phone call in Year 1 Volume 7 is an example of this. He was acting strange, cutting off their relationship, and she caught on to that. This was a moment we know he decided to change his plan again. He no longer needed to confront Yuan at all, since Yuan would never have discovered him if he stopped helping Class D. but he did so to protect Kei and get closer to him. This was when he readopted his class transfer strategy. His goal now is to be defeated and prove his father's ideology wrong. He began grooming Horikita's class to improve. He fixed Horikita's leadership, helped Sudo grow as a person, all for the purpose of seeing their growth and strengthening the class. He knows that deep down, nobody at Advanced Nutrient High School can beat him in a one-on-one, and it isn't even close. So this way, he can try and go all out during a class competition, and if he loses, that he will get his wish of losing. This class transfer strategy originally came from Volume 3 to Volume 7, but changed in Volume 7. He first just wanted to have a plan to get away from Chamashita if either she was telling the truth about knowing his father, or if he couldn't get around her leverage. Events in Year 1 Volume 7 made that unnecessary, but his long-term goal allowed him to still use this plan, but later down the line for a slightly different purpose. This showcases Ayanokoji's capability of adapting his plan on a long-term and short-term, being able to switch his planning phases depending on the need, and control his environment while handling the flow of information and concealing his true intentions the whole time. This one is quite close. Ayanokoji is resourceful and creative in his approaches, and manages to use people around him to advance his planning without them realizing it. Meanwhile, Johan utilizes logical and linear planning tactics and coats them in multiple layers of deception by working alone, making it impossible to track his actions back to him without knowing he's the one behind them. Planning could go to both or Johan, with it being very close. Finally, we come to strategy. Starting a game with Johan. Johan's isolation of Schrold is one of his most impressive strategies. Upon the realization that the real son of Schrold came into the picture, Johan adapted his strategy of isolating Schrold by writing him off front through suicide, insinuation and fabrication of crime, so that Johan can hone towards Schrold himself, which is what he originally planned. Upon meeting Carl for the first time on the roof, he initially planned to push him off the roof to make it seem as though it was another suicide case. But after hearing his past and his connection to Schrold, Johan felt a sense of empathy for Carl and ended up tearing upon listening to it, and later on changed his plan for both him and Johan to be closer to Schrold instead. Johan had to accomplish this by suggesting Carl and his colleague mate to bring Schrold to the Obenberg's forest, a place of comfort for Schrold, in which he attempted to strategize his relationship with Carl and Schrold to bring them closer, in hopes of deepening their bond. When it was found that the forest was turned into a construction site, Carl could not bring upon himself to explain what happened. Johan improvised the situation immediately through suggesting thoughts to Schrold. Since Schrold is blind and is unable to see, Johan had to be selective of his words to convey a sense of imagination towards Schrold. Johan knew the description of the forest and his comfort towards Schrold through the Thursday readings, in which he took his job upon for the purpose of gathering information about Schrold's life, so that he can home in closer towards him even more. Johan then began to convey the sight of the forest towards Schrold, providing him with an apple on the ground, as though he is describing it out on a poetic level, in which was Schrold's delight to hear. After eating the apple, through Johan's description, Schrold began to cry, as if he could see the forest, which gave him a sense of comfort, furthering in hopes of using Carl to hone into Schrold. Johan teaches Carl Latin, similarly to what he did to Edmund Sverren, to make sure as though Schrold would buy into Carl being his true son. When Carl told Schrold that Johan was the one who taught Carl Latin, Schrold commented on Johan's learning ability and knowledge, having mastered Latin, business and law, and even going as far as stating that Johan is experienced in most forms of discipline and quite capable of adapting to each. Schrold then smiled upon the prospect of Johan being his true son. After Carl raised that question, this upsets Carl, in which he informed Johan about it. Upon him asking Carl any form of evidence in the proof that Carl really is Schrold's actual son, to which Carl denied it at first. So Johan attempted to reveal Carl's true feelings, in which Carl's intention of learning Latin as a way to please Schrold. But Carl, feeling discouraged, ends up quitting reading for Schrold, in which he provided Johan with the proof in the end, a rabbit's foot in which Schrold gave to Margaret Carl's mom. Johan asked Carl to give him that to persuade Charles of Carl being his biological son. When Charles called Carl and asked him to read for him in Latin, Charles even commented how it was the best recitation that he read. This convinced him even further that Carl was his actual son, and Charles told Carl after he hugged him how Johan was going to work with Charles as his secretary, which accomplished Johan's strategy of isolating Charles completely from everyone else by providing Charles his son while at the same time establishing key relationships between one another. With this, Johan convinced Charles that Carl was his real son, making sure Charles would drop his attachment to the Fawn case completely, as the main reason he was attached to it was because of the perception that Fawn was his son. Replacing Fawn with Carl, while at the same time gaining closer relations between the two, complete his strategy of isolating Charles from everyone else by eliminating the people closest to Charles, while bringing in himself and his true son to the picture. By closing an investigation to the Fawn case means closing any leads in which Johan was responsible of Fawn's death. To compare, during the organized attack on Ichinose by the joint forces of Nagumo and Arisu, Ayanokoji was able to make multiple impressive deductions and started to make a strategy on the basis of his reasoning on the spot, not long after he had been informed of the rumors. He was able to get Ichinose out of her checkmate situation without being detectable, and conducted his strategy on the spot without any preparation beforehand while adapting on the spot to the new information he gained. Ayanokoji neutralized Sakanagi's ongoing action, protected Ichinose, diverted Hashimoto's attention, used Kiriyama to his advantage, handled Kushida up, and posed a threat to Nagumo as a countermeasure in case his initial strategy failed. To begin with, Ichinose has been attacked by rumors, stating that she was a criminal. Kanzaki has been confronting Hashimoto alone while investigating the rumors about Ichinose. Hashimoto's evasiveness, confidence, and warding led Ayanokoji to the conclusion that not all the rumors surrounding Ichinose were lies. Afterwards, Ayanokoji was able to find out that Kamura had not acted alone in revealing Ichinose's past by using his analytical skills. Ayanokoji uncovered the truth and exposed Sakanagi's involvement. Moreover, he also believes now that Arisu wanted to lure him in so that he would get himself involved with the rumors about Ichinose. Ayanokoji was able to reason Nagumo's entire part of the strategy after a series of mentions, deductions, and information gathering throughout Volume 9. More importantly, Ayanokoji engineering his strategy in such a way that it would make everything about Nagumo's own strategy go on exactly as planned from his perspective. That is until the aftermath of the events, thus making himself completely undetectable during the execution. He couldn't do any careless moves that would arouse the attention of the perpetrators. Intervening without clear understanding nor efficient planning could escalate tension or cause unintended consequences. He called Kushida one of the most influential students and had deep connections run through in all of Year 1 with the hope of retrieving adequate information in all class grades except Class A so that they would take the blame for what he was planning, which was basically a school gossip that targeted a few individual students across classes B, C, and D with the intention of getting the school involved in the matter by arousing the gossip situation more. This situation did well in concealing the real perpetrator of it while also putting Class A in dire situation since they were involved with Class B's gossip attacks. No one was able to suspect Ayanokoji for it. Class A was a perfect scapegoat. The reason why Nagumo didn't suspect anything in the climax of the exam is because he planned similar events to take place from the beginning. Actually, the reason why Nagumo was only able to deduce where something went wrong in his plan in the aftermath of the events instead of being alerted during it was because of Ayanokoji's strategy being so brilliant that it would work exactly the same as Nagumo's planned out events in the open, with the only difference being in the change of Ichinose behind the scenes and the sudden breach of information using the bulletin boards. Nagumo's strategy in this volume was effective in normal conditions, but Ayanokoji was multiple steps ahead. Ayanokoji had all his bases covered to avoid detection from Nagumo while thwarting Nagumo's plan of playing the savior, which the only thing that he can do now is suspect Ayanokoji, since also Kushida came to Nagumo for help. Although Nagumo might not be interested in Ayanokoji, he might still stick his name to his memory whether he wanted to or not. Ayanokoji served the connection between Nagumo and Kushida. Moreover, Nagumo is not able to get a grasp over Ayanokoji's abilities and was forced to ignore the attention he gave to Ayanokoji because of Manabu. Nagumo's feeling that something was off wasn't enough to make him actually interested in Ayanokoji. Also, Ayanokoji could confirm through his plans that Ichinose's classmates were bad supporters for Ichinose as mentioned by Ayanokoji, as they could not criticize or provide a different viewpoint to Ichinose that she needed. So Ayanokoji took over the role and became the person Ichinose can go to complain about things or discuss her problems. Ayanokoji orchestrated a complex strategy and paralleled it to Nagumo to stay hidden as he achieved multiple goals. Johan, on the other hand, isolated Strolled and utilizing his influence got close to him and used that position to erase his traces further. Johan's strategy is great, but Ayanokoji takes strategy due to his dealing with a lot of moving parts and had a larger scale to manage, even though Johan's methodology was efficient and consistent. Ayanokoji's strategy is encompass all his goals swiftly and effectively. So, who wins? The monster or the masterpiece? Well, it depends on the scenario. If they're in the monsterverse where Ayanokoji has to trail Johan, it's likely Ayanokoji could suspect Johan's framing, but without any influence or authority, he might not be able to act much against Johan. However, if they were in the cultverse, then Johan's move would be a lot more limited and hiding his identity using his general methodology, and while he could adapt eventually, he would be more outclassed and restricted and probably wouldn't be able to avoid explosion if him and Ayanokoji were going head to head. So overall, Ayanokoji will likely outclass in general outsmarting or fixed situations, but Johan will have the edge in real life situations or influence based scenarios.